And
build
when
and
we
so
came
on.
to this valley, we were told specifically that this wasn't possible. This can't, you've got far too grandiose a vision, and these things just don't fit within inside regulatory constraints. So a couple of us came forward and said, well, if it's not legal, how about if we help you make it legal? And it's a bit apropos to go in and volunteer at your local government office. It doesn't happen too often.
No, that's for sure.
We've created a brand new zone that's never, it creates a precedent for Canada, and there's people that borrow it down into the United States as well.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. I'm in lovely Vancouver Island in Canada with the Executive Director of O.U.R Ecovillage. Her name is Brandy Gallagher McPherson. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
And welcoming us here to your Ecovillage, which is just lovely. It's quite an amazing place with lots going on, but we'll get back to that in a minute. How did you get into founding or co-founding an Ecovillage?
Well, this space is actually a whole environment, so it contains many, many things. What would draw someone like me to that, really by my own background, is kind of an interesting experience, but I grew up in a communal setting in the old days of a commune in the 60s.
There aren't too many people that, I haven't talked with anybody yet who's done that. Where was the commune?
In a place just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia, up in what is now the Whistler Mountain International Ski Resort area.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So things have changed a lot because in those days it was pioneering, living very close to the land, a whole spirit of social justice, and so that kind of founding understanding of being in relationship with a sense of place and really protecting and stewarding places. The family home that I grew up in on the commune actually was donated to the provincial government to become a conservation park in perpetuity. And so whole backgrounds around conservation work, then on to a farm life and agricultural production, and that's really fed forward. And then my professional life has really involved a lot of time around community development. I worked as a therapist. I've also worked within government quite a bit. So there's many, many elements coming together to create something for me that would be of interest to draw me to a place like this.
In a sense, you're extending and taking those threads from your early life and bringing them up to a next level here, it would seem, and using them.
I like to think about the opportunity that we all have to sort of weave our life experience together, and really that kind of enrichment of everything we've ever done as best practices or best pieces in our life, really coming together to serve on a whole nother level. And being here for me is that experience.
So how did this get started in this particular experience? Let's do the beginnings. Finding land or people, where did you begin?
Well, I think this is always important for people to think about, because I talk about the years I spent sitting in circle talking about this opportunity, and many people of like-mindedness would come and go, and we'd have, different visionings and different dialogues, but it took a long time of talking about something before the original 5 of us sort of created a path to this particular space, and we looked at land all over.
Wow.
And
so
yeah,
you're talking about a dedicated vision for you, in a sense, if you're talking about it for many years, and even 5 years to find this place.
And I often think that people don't necessarily know the fullness of their vision, but it's by talking to each other that we come to realize more and more. I actually think that's a very important part of, is this really what I want to do? Because it's often easy to step in quickly to something, and we're so drawn, and our hearts yearn for community.
I think that's so true. That's so true. But you're talking about it. I think that in talking aloud about it, it's sort of a sound check by the mirrors you get back, and listening to your own self is like, well, do I really want it this way? And the questions that people ask, I'm sure, help hone that.
Yeah. Am I urban? Am I rural? Am I this? Am I that? These are all elements in how we're creating, people talk about alternative lifestyles, but we're creating a different path. And it's borrowing from everything that's ever been. The whole Ecovillage movement, intentional communities, all the kind of sustainability movement, we're looking for what's new, but we're also really founding it on all the things that have worked for so long. I mean, there's generations that knew how to live sustainably.
Yes, yes. And how to live more communally. I mean, it's simply been in what? Our last 100 years say that we've been mobile because of gasoline and so on, to be able to be separated and break that fabric of the social fabric and move outside of our communities that we were in. So you're, in a sense, reweaving that.
And I often talk to people about the idea that we have incredible opportunities in a space like this, and we can get into a lot of really technical, professional aspects of what does sustain. And I believe that when you put people in a residential setting like this, our biggest work and our biggest learning is how to live together. Very simply, that kind of element that, for the most part, especially in North America, we have unlearned. We
don't have very good practice and skills of how do you live with each other and get along with each other. I mean, we're used to being able, I'm out of there when things get tough.
My next thesis, and I hope my final one, is really going to focus on what I call recreating the village mind. And bringing back, I would suggest it's in our DNA. Many of us had our tribal history much more recent than some other cultures.
Yes.
Yet it's still within all of us. And it's just relearning. How do you and I and the land and everything around us create that kind of sense of relationship again?
It's interesting that you didn't stop at the human.
Right.
When you talked about relationship, you included the land and therefore all the other species, everyone else.
We're in the Cowichan Nation, the First Peoples Nation here. Traditional territory is the Cowichan peoples. Mm-hmm. And within the life and times of the Cowichan and many Aboriginal people, there's a statement that says, all my relations.
Yes.
And so we're speaking of everything, every element of relationship. And really, if the essence of that is holism or all this language we use, that's what sustainability is then about.
I think it also is about, in addition, that means that if you're in a relationship, you're also aware of your impact on everyone else, everything else.
Yeah. Well, because relationships,
long term.
Right. And relationships are two-way. They're not just about inputs and inputs and inputs. And it's interesting because the technical theories behind sustainability are about equal inputs and outputs. But what if we were beyond sustainability now? What if sustainability has become passé in a sense? What if we actually need a different way of living in the world that's about reparation?
I was thinking about that we have already taken out more fish, more of many resources than is sustainable. We couldn't just level off now.
So at our Ecovillage, in terms of our conservation work that we do here, one of the focuses is to try and give back 3 times more than we take out.
3 times. Now and how do you do that? Give me an example.
Well, in the easy sense, there's the obvious measurements. If we're measuring our footprint of how we live and the impact we have, there's ways to look at, okay, these things I'm implicating or impacting, so I'm actually receiving something through that. I need to give back in these ways. If you talk about soil building, it's very simple to see. These nutrients are drawn out. I need to rebuild nutrients in this way.
Right.
When you start to talk a bigger picture, you can start to talk about things like carbon offsets, where you can footprint things, and maybe I can't have a direct relationship impact in this way and give and take in this particular part of a relationship, but I could pay it back to a different relationship over here. So if you're living in a whole system and you're one of the elements in an ecosystem, then you can pay back to your environment in different ways.
So one of the ways you may be using carbon because you take your vehicle to town to buy groceries, but a way you can give back is you're buying organically, which means they're cleaning up the soil, or you're growing trees, which which sequester carbon.
Right.
Which you are doing here.
Well,
one little piece.
And hopefully we're not driving our car on gas because we filter our own vegetable oil and have our own biodiesel processor.
All right.
So hopefully most of our fuel is offset already. And then hopefully we're not buying that much organics out in the wider world,
Because
but we're
you're growing
raising
it
our own.
here. Right.
So there's all these elements to look at. What can you do really locally, like in your backyard? What do you need to go to your next sphere of impact and relationship? And then how can you maybe trade with that as well? So if
Sure,
you're creating
sure.
a whole different economy around it, it becomes an economy of give and receive versus an economic money-based economy.
Right, and you're going to be more connected in relationship to what you are giving and receiving, even if it's, particularly because it's local.
Correct, yeah.
Not just money.
Yeah.
So here, well, let's go back. We didn't even cover what is
this
O.U.R stand for?
So O.U.R is actually an acronym, and it stands for One United Resource. And it's really a whole fun name because its philosophy is meant to speak of the notion that you and I and everybody else here come as a contribution. We all are a resource. We all have something to bring. 102, whatever your goings on in your life is, you're bringing something to this enterprise. And so when people start to see themselves that way and actually see each other that way, that changes relationship as well. And then if you further that, the whole idea of the name, Our Ecovillage, as soon as you leave here and Peak Moment says, oh, at Our Ecovillage, you've actually implicated yourself as being part of the experience.
That's right. I'm one of you.
Except for you become one of us.
That's
and
right.
so the us and them starts to disappear, which is a fundamental point of the name, because it's really trying to dig into another level of our social constructs, of our ideas of ownership, and the whole idea that it is our community. These are our kids. This is our neighborhood. This is our planet.
Sounds like a real contrast to the me and my and mine sort of hyper-individualism that's so strong, certainly in America, North Americans, whatever. It's like me and mine and my property rights and so on. It's just a real wonderful counterbalance to that.
Well, and this whole space is really created by that philosophy. So the whole space is by, for, and through community. And that doesn't just mean who's living here.
All right.
It means the neighbors. It means the town. It means government. It means people in Europe that are in relationship with their NGO and our NGO. Community is in the very broadest sense. If somebody or something doesn't want this next step to happen, it will not. Just recently, earlier,
for our Ecovillage, some
Correct,
step. It won't happen.
the work won't be done, the groups won't be facilitated, the people only show up because they are drawn to do it. The donations only show up because people are interested in contributing. The space is only created because people care to make it happen.
Yes.
So it's not driven by money. It's not driven by some higher mission that has a power base behind it. It can only happen because the world wants it to happen.
It's a nice philosophy and a sense of support, actually, and a sense of guidance. Like if it wants to happen, it will indeed happen here.
And it makes it sound very light, but imagine the challenge of you put in all your posts for a couple-acre garden extension and no fencing gets donated.
Yep.
But it's not beyond us to pick up the phone or start the emails and say, which company wants to partner with the Village Project and donate the fencing?
Yeah. I mean, so yes, you step out and you initiate.
So relationship takes on layers and layers and layers.
What? Tell us a little bit about how many people are involved. Some of the on the ground stuff. If somebody were to come and walk along and visit our Ecovillage, what would they see? Who would they be meeting, and so on?
So you'd be coming into our 25-acre model demonstration sustainable community. So in that context, we have permanent residential folk. We have people that come for short-term stays and they intern. Maybe they just want to learn about what is community life like, what would being in an eco-village as a lifestyle be for me. So we create those opportunities. Then we have whole summer programs where people can stay. They're in a community building process, but they might actually concentrate their learning focus into things like natural building, permaculture design, sustainable food production. So there's areas of focus that people have that bring them here. And then we have things like short-term guests. We have an eco bed and breakfast.
Oh, fun.
We have
Fun.
tenting. We have dorm space. So we try and make it accessible to as wide a range of folks as possible. And then there's also tours, so people can come on site. There's a 2-hour educational tour with an educational presentation and a walkabout. So these things are all happening simultaneously in terms of people. And then you have incredible other activities, and we can talk a little bit about that.
Some of your other educational things. Some of what I know that we see here is, go back to what you're saying, natural building. You've got several cob structures that are built or being built.
Right, we've got 4 buildings on the go right now that are natural buildings that do come in the form of cob construction, which is earthen construction. We also have hybrids that are cob and straw bale.
Aha.
We do very unique kind of roof settings, so the buildings really look very Hobbit home-like.
I noticed that. I love the curving shapes. I mean, it's just, and the curving shapes indoors. It's like it's sort of an embrace quality. It's just really very organic.
Well, it's one thing about natural building is it's really about an artistry of life.
It's very visible and a joy about this. I mean, the colors that you've used to paint some of the structures, it's really lovely. Lovely.
I think it's like it brings out the artist within. There's people that step on site and they say, no, I could never do a mosaic, and they're the first ones in with smashed tile. And so there's something comes alive for people because the buildings are alive.
They are. You can feel that. And that approach is not intimidating. You know, packing clay is like the child in everybody sort of knows what that feels like and can get into it. You also have very huge greenhouses and growing space. That's pretty intensive.
That's a real big focus on the next steps of our Ecovillage, because as we embark on having our 10 residences on site, and this is for long-term stewardship and folks that can actually live here on a more permanent basis, we've poured all of our time and energy into design and infrastructure setup and wider community legal political work. Now we're finally getting to have permanent homes, which is amazing if you've been staying the course that long. And that means we need more food. And really what we're also about is educating that we all need to have more food.
Yes. That's certainly, I'm noticing that as we meet with folks thinking about peak oil and being ready, it's the first thing that I notice on many communities, the water and the food for the broader community.
And in an area like this, because we're on an island, food security takes on a whole new meaning. Vancouver Island has approximately or less 3 days of food supply. If we're shut down for some reason, the whole idea of, when the millennium changed and it's the year 2000 and Y2K suddenly could stop, people started to recognize a little bit about. It was the beginning of what people are starting to recognize now with issues around oil. And people that never spoke sustainability language before are suddenly now waking up to a conversation that goes something like 3 days of food supply on Vancouver Island. We have no food security solutions here yet. And this is an agricultural belt. So what do we need to do as communitarians? And I'm not just talking in a project like this, but as the whole area.
The whole region.
To start to map our food sources and start to rebuild possibilities around food production.
Right. Actually, I want to go back to something else here, stepping aside from the place here, which is wonderful. What did it take for you to be able to deal with zoning? That's a big issue, I'm sure, everywhere, and you've made some history on that. Tell us about it.
Well, we have a lot of connection in North America. And actually, even prior to coming here, I and other people that are involved here had worked and or researched in like Europe and South America and different places. And to come back here, what was very noticeable in North America is some of the best work and some of the most incredible people doing work ended up with the biggest roadblock being around land use.
Yes.
And recently, a couple years ago in a tour, there was one aspect after another with projects where you couldn't have a number of people living residentially on site. You certainly couldn't have temporary structures. You definitely couldn't have natural building being used as residential space, that kind of. There wasn't any laws to make it possible.
And therefore, the regulatory agencies would just say, you can't do this. You can't rezone
and when we came to this valley, we were told specifically that this wasn't possible. This can't. You've got far too grandiose a vision. and these things just don't fit within inside regulatory constraints.
What did you do? Because obviously you're here.
We have a little cliche that we coined when we were first coming into this process, and we actually asked government, 11 aspects of regulatory authority are involved in land use in this area. So we said we would love to do thus and such, and we brought them in all of our homework. We did years of base maps and overlays and mapped everything. Teams of biologists doing species mapping and
Wow.
agrologists doing soil analysis. So
You did your homework.
It was impeccable, and bringing it in, albeit some of it was in crayons and pencil crayons, but very beautiful to give sort of the feel for all the technical. And we brought it into the local government, and they kindly explained to us that we really had no knowledge of development, and folks just can't go out and do these kind of things. And we said, well, what do you mean if it's not legal? Are you saying it's not legal to live sustainably? And so a couple of us came forward and said, well, if it's not legal, how about if we help you make it legal? And it's apropos to go in and volunteer at your local government office. It doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So think about taking the risk to build relationships that are completely different than the us and them we usually posture into with, oh, you're in
Adversarial,
an
you're the bad
authority.
guy, right,
Yeah, you're
right.
the bank manager, you're the head of government office of this. So we've created these relationships and projections that keep us apart in trying to accomplish our possibilities. What about if you flip that around and actually notice that we could be on the same team creating a solution? And if people were willing to volunteer to do that, I think it sort of took folks aback.
I bet it did. I bet it did. You're willing to do that work?
And we have a lot of interviews and conversations, and they actually, some of the regulatory folks will come and talk about their experience working with grassroots community and how inspiring, infuriating, confusing, challenging, all the things that were involved in trying to do something where there was no path.
So you've carved a path, and so there are new policies. Is that true?
We've created a brand new zone that's never, it creates a precedent for Canada, and there's people that borrow it down into the United States as well. And I think, you know, because we're a smaller organization, relatively speaking, there's some larger groups out there that have been lobbying politically and professionally for a long time. And we were contacted by a university in California that said, who are you guys? Like, you just came in out of nowhere, and how did you do that? We've been working on it for a decade.
And you just went and did it.
And we just went and did it.
Wow.
And, you know, conversely, they had a lot of resources and a lot of fund resources. And so it is quite magical that this has come to pass. And yet again, if you really focused on how did that manage to happen, I would suggest that it was about risking having a different way of dissolving that us and them. And it has to be genuine. This isn't a political move where you kind of sidle up to somebody.
Yeah.
I don't think it works that way. I think this has to be, we're all in this together. If you want to talk about solutions, it takes every person to start to jump in.
That's a big thing to notice here in an increasingly polarized world,
Yeah.
you know, particularly around the authorities, as we are going to have to pioneer new living arrangements, new fuels, things like composting toilets, you know, you're going to meet regulations everywhere.
Well, and
We have
I've been
about
amazed.
4 minutes, so I just want
Okay.
to tell you, so we make sure that we cover everything we want
Yeah.
to.
Well, I think, you know, some of the things that are really important to notice is that this whole idea of changing relationships, I do believe they are changing. As much as there's polarization, I think this place is an example. I think it's an outstanding example of people coming from all different walks and talks of life. And that creates a ton of challenge. Again, I'm not making this a
sure.
light process, but people coming together to create solutions together in relationship is the hard part for us, and I think the biggest learning and the biggest opportunity towards solution.
And it looks to me that your model is big gains coming from that.
And there is eco-villages all over the world, so this isn't completely unique. There's over 600 eco-villages and intentional communities in the world. We're just borrowing from what other people know, what we've known since time immemorial about sustainability, and best practices from cultures and generations before.
But you're also bringing it into this time, and what you talked about working together with the regulatory agencies, because I realize that's a big hurdle that many intentional communities hit against?
It's kind of where angels fear to tread. Most people, that's the scariest thing we've never taken on. We don't want to work with that. And a lot of people doing good work would rather do it way out in the back 40, like in the situations I grew up in. But maybe now it's time to come out of the closet and say, you know what, this is logical, practical thinking. This is urban solution, this is rural, this is looking at it within building codes, because we've taken along a lot of the building code issues as well, wastewater treatment issues. Instead of trying to factor around what policies and bylaws specify, how about trying to build new aspects in? And it takes time and it takes work, and it creates amazing outcomes.
Your village is a statement to that, really. Because when you think about the increasing pressure we have for good water, for land resources and so on, to try to live sustainably, we are going to have to do that kind of conserving and finding new solutions. I mean, we cannot all be flushing all of our good water down the toilet.
And we can't imagine that somebody else is going to solve this. We have a school on site by the name of Topia. And Topia literally translated means place, versus utopia, which means no place. So it's kind of hearkening towards the idea that this idea of nirvana or paradise beyond, that rather than going on within the imaginary plan, that we need the get real plan. We need things that apply for today and for now with the resources we have, and get started. Because if we wait for the grand picture to land, no one's going to hand us that. We've got to make it happen.
You've done it. You've done it. So, in your last minute, what do you find the most inspiring about all that you have set into motion and what you're doing now?
I think I personally feel inspired by people that have the courage to risk stepping forward when there is no path. That into a space where the world looks like it has a lot of challenges, and that's no fooling. Yes. That to go forward with heart and passion is all we have.
Thank you for your heart and your passion. You're watching Peak Moments, Community Responses for a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join us next time.